So the question I want to ask is, what is biology? And hopefully you can answer this question and you know that biology really is simply the study of life. And what people have studied in terms of life has changed very drastically from decade to decade in recent time. And so this year we're going to learn more about the study of life. But I hope that you have asked this question, and maybe you have and maybe you haven't. But what exactly, so what is life? And how would we define it? How do we define something that is alive or isn't alive? And this is a question that scientists and biologists really struggle with because it doesn't seem to be such a simple answer. There seem to be a lot of exceptions. And so scientists have worked together and comprised a list of characteristics of things that are alive. If you ask one person, they might have a different number of things on this list, but essentially it's the same ideas. So we're going to learn a particular list for this class that will help you be successful. So let's go ahead and start talking about that. What is life? And we're defining this as the characteristics of life. The characteristics of life. And I'm going to make a list here. And the first one I'm going to write is homeostasis. And this is a word that you may know, you may not know. We're just going to break this down a little bit. So if you know the word stasis or static, that means same. And so all that homeostasis means, go back to that color, all that homeostasis means is keeping an internal balance. So all living things are able to do this. They're all able to maintain some kind of internal environment. So for humans, I'm going to write an example here. An example would be body temperature. So body temp. So if your body gets hot, your body sweats to cool down. If your body gets cold, it shivers to generate some more heat to warm itself up. It's keeping an internal balance. And all living things can do that. Not necessarily with temperature. They have other ways of doing that based on their environment, but they have to keep the same amount of salt in their body or the same amount of water or other things like that. So homeostasis, we'll label this as our first thing. Homeostasis. The second thing is that all living things are made out of cells, or rather at least one cell. All living things are made from one or more cells. And that is something that, again, scientists define as a requirement of life. The third thing is that all living things respond to a stimulus. So a stimulus is something that causes a reaction. So basically, if all living things react to some change. So an example, let me go back to my yellow color here. An example would be retracting your hand when touching something hot, like the stove or something, right? If you think about it, you actually and your ancestors wouldn't have, you or your ancestors wouldn't survive very long if you were unable to respond to the stimulus. Okay. The next one, 4, is that all living things use energy and nutrients. So in other words, we all use energy. We have to eat something or make that to survive. We all living things, not just humans, all living things have adaptations. This is from evolution. Which we'll learn more about. That's 5. It's 5 things on our list so far. That's already a lot. Number 6 is grow and develop. So, grow and develop. So, growing just means, and I want you to write this down, grow means to make more cells. Develop means to change. So, I often think of, I'm going to write this down here. So, growth is like a caterpillar getting longer, and develop is the caterpillar, you can spell caterpillar, changing, that's delta, changing into a butterfly. That's development. So humans do this as well. As a baby, you get bigger, but that baby will turn into a toddler. That toddler, that's development. The toddler will turn into an older child, and then into a teenager. So there's a key distinction between growing and developing. Okay, let's see. We've got went to a different color. Organization. All living things have some sense of organization, and that could be even the organelles inside of a cell. It could be cells that happen to organize themselves into tissues, or into organs, or even organ systems. So essentially what this means, organization, is that that the different parts have different jobs. Now I've got one more to add, so I'm running out of space. So I'm going to scoot over here to the right and go back up. The last one I put is organization. And I need to add number 8. I'll do it in the same color. Number 8. And the last thing that all living things have to be able to do, or the characteristics of all living things, is that they reproduce, or they make offspring. And if you think about it, if living things didn't do that, they wouldn't survive or wouldn't be able to pass down information. You and I wouldn't be here, nor would any other form of life. So there are some things that I want to point out that are kind of exceptions to this list, but I'm going to put a question mark because they're not really some of these things. So let's see, hybrids. So for example, a mule has all these characteristics of life, but it is a sterile animal, so it does not reproduce. Yet its cells reproduce, and I think we would all argue that a mule is alive, even though it doesn't meet all these characteristics of life. And so again, this comes back to the idea that this is very difficult for scientists to actually define. The other thing that I want to add here is viruses. So viruses are considered to be not alive because they're not made out of cells, and they don't reproduce on their own. They need a host to reproduce, although some scientists would consider them to be alive, and they certainly affect living things. So there are these ideas that may not fit into the strict list. Now I want to go back through this really quickly and help you remember this list and find an acronym for it, and we like to say H. Krigor, like a name. So let me show you where that comes from. So we've got H, C, R, E, A, G, O, and scoot over to the right here, R. And so that gives us, I'm going to write it over here, H. Krigor. So it's homeostasis, cells responding to a stimulus, energy and nutrients, adaptations, growth and development, organization, and reproduction. These are the characteristics of life that I need you to know, and a good way to remember that is it's like somebody's name, H. Krigor. And I see that I'm at 10 minutes. I'm going to stop right there.